In this video, we'll be going over bindings, in particular bindings that we will be applying to this little bra top. To work through this, I'll be working with the file 6 bindings, and I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so we can more closely look at the finishing details that are present currently. It will be easier to work with this tool also if we go ahead and turn off the avatar. All right, so now that she's gone, again, I'll just navigate a little bit closer. You can see the edges on this top are not particularly smooth. Again, whether you're an experienced sewer or not, this does not look like a finished garment, okay? Typically, again, there would be bindings here around the neckline and around the arm. So to work to introduce this, what we'll do is go ahead and expand your 3D window. And you'll see two series of tools that look really similar. You'll want the one that's on the right side, and it's called Binding, and it has its own corresponding Select Binding tool. To get started with this, I want you to go ahead and click on the Binding tool, and you're going to see as you move around, you're going to have this little dot that follows you. You need to very closely follow this neckline. You don't want to accidentally get off track or skip any areas. And so I'm going to click and you'll see a blue line follows me. And I can either work really slowly all the way around and just make sure I don't miss anything. I can also go ahead and just lay a few dots along the way to ensure I didn't miss anything. So for instance, right now I got off track at one point and it didn't pick up my bindings at all. So essentially it's like I'm starting over again. All right, so this time I'm going to go ahead and just click to drop some dots just to show that, yep, I'm still working on this. Even if I accidentally get off track, I definitely want my binding here, okay? And when you come all the way around back to your starting point, Chloe is going to work and it's going to go ahead and introduce an initial binding, okay? And you can see it here. I'll go ahead and simulate for a moment just to see what that looks like. I'll click off so we get rid of some of that yellow. And again, hopefully at this point you understand this looks much more finished than it did a moment ago. And this is the kind of thing I want you to make sure you are adding to your garments for your final project if they're in need of it, okay? Now, I want to edit my binding. And again, you've got an edit binding tool. Okay, it's called Select Binding, but it will help you select the binding that you want to edit. And you can't do that in simulation mode, by the way. So I'll turn off simulation and you can see the difference. As soon as that's off and I hover, that blue line is visible. And I'll come over and open my property editor. And you'll see here, just working from the top down, again, hopefully at this point you're getting more and more comfortable with the property editor. Things like name and item number and type, a lot of this is sort of typical at the top. But in terms of things that are different for your binding, your type, you do have two choices here. You have over and under. And I think this is easier to see when you use a contrasting fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to the blue. And I'll simulate for a moment just so you can see. Okay, that the blue is actually on the inside, it's under. And again, if I come over and just edit this, and to make this easier, I'll just close my 2D window. Okay, so one more time, I'll select this. The blue is under. If I go ahead and do over, and I'll give that a moment to work, you'll see that the blue is on the outside. Okay, so again, with the contrast, it's going to be under is on the inside, over is on the outside. So I do want the contrast on the outside, so I'm going to leave that set to over. And then you'll see that you have this option for width. Okay, width is actually sort of confusing, but it's going to be the width of this binding, and the width is running vertical, or it's width in this direction, but here it's vertical. Either way, to get a sense and wrap your head around exactly what that measurement's going to look like, I'm going to go ahead and increase my width from 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. And I'll just hit enter for that to take place, to take effect, and you'll see the size of that change. Okay, the length is going to adjust the sort of look and fit a little bit. Depending on the length, it's typically going to shorten or shrink the neckline and armholes a bit. Essentially, binding always adds just a little bit of tension. And so far, I've, for the most part, just left that at the default. But again, if you were more familiar with sewing or the sort of, regularities of this particular industry, you may know that perhaps that measurement should change a little bit, okay? If you continue to move down, you'll see different fabrics. And for this particular garment, different fabrics have already been loaded. Okay, these would exist on the object browser. And so that's why I'm able to change the color here pretty fluidly. In addition to this appearance of the fabric, you also can work with the grain direction as this is applied. So whether it's on the bias or the weft, or if you want to apply custom. And then you'll see this in a moment when I apply some top stitches, but you can go ahead and apply top stitch on top of your binding. I just don't have any top stitch ready yet. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close my property editor. And my object browser is missing. So if that ever happens to you, down here at the bottom, you have this refresh button. I'm going to go ahead and click that. It's just going to reset everything. And it opened a whole bunch of stuff up that I need to close. But I was trying to get to my object browser, and here you'll see I can scroll over again. Well, first off, again, I said that you had all of these fabrics. You see the fabrics here on your object browser. But over here, like I said, I don't have any top stitch turned on. So I'm going to go ahead and select add. And I'll go ahead and customize this top stitch a little bit just so it's easier to see as I apply it. The first thing I'm going to do is just apply a really loud color. Okay, so something really sort of contrasting to that blue. So I'll go ahead and make it orange. And then up here at the top, we'll talk about top stitch a little bit more deeply in another video, but I'll go ahead and increase the thickness. That should make it easier to see. Okay, and there are some other fields here that we could play with, but again, I'm just setting up this top stitch so we can play with it as we apply our binding. Okay, so again, I did a contrasting color and I increased the thread thickness to help it be a little bit more visible. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna go ahead and close my object browser and my property editor, and I'll go ahead and just rotate, and I'll go ahead and just minimize the size of my 2D a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing for my armholes. Okay, so again, my binding tool, I'm going to work my way around and just drop a few markers to make sure it knows that yes, I'm still working on my binding. Don't turn off. Click to close. Okay, I'll give that a moment to render, and you'll see that's already present. I'll do the same thing on this side. Work my way around, close where I started, and I'll give that a moment. Okay, and again, you can see that this is present. It's just not, I haven't assigned a contrasting color, so it's not as evident. But again, it looks much more finished. Okay, this looks like a finished garment that is almost ready for sale. Again, I'm going to edit the binding. So I'm going to grab this one, and I'll hold shift and grab this one as well so I can make sure that they both have the same appearance. And I'll go into my property editor again. And this time I'll go ahead and maybe do that contrasting color. Maybe I'll do over so it's more visible. Okay, synchronization. All right, now it worked on one side. It doesn't look like it worked on the other. Let me simulate for a moment. Okay, and this one is definitely still sitting on the inside. So let me click that separately and I'll do over. Give that one a moment. Okay, so now I have all of this contrasting binding, and I'll try again. This should let you select more than one at a time. Okay, it's being a little finicky, so let's see what happens. So again, I've got everything set to this jersey. It's over. I'm going to leave the binding a little different. You'll see, remember, this one's 1/2 inch, and this binding on the armholes is 1/4 inch. And then let's go ahead and try to apply this top stitch. Okay, I'm going to turn on segment A, and it's going to default to the only top stitch that I have created, which is top stitch 1. And if you zoom in, okay, you'll see here that that orange is definitely visible. If I were to apply segment B, I'll turn that on. It's going to use, again, the only top stitch that I've created, and it's applying it to the two sides of my binding, so A and B. Okay, so again, for your final project, I want you to make sure that you're thinking through all of these finishing details that will, again, make this look like a complete garment, something that would actually be in a retail store ready for sale. All right, that is it for binding.